This is the third renovation of that one. They hadn't built Ginger Hall. Raider Hall hadn't had its renovation. Claypool Young Art Building wasn't up. They were finishing that. The Northern Kentucky Vocational Institute wasn't up. So, you know, yeah.
You probably remember your classrooms as mostly experiencing construction sounds.
Actually, most of my classrooms were in Combs and Old Raider and Lappin Hall. So I didn't have to deal with a lot of. And I remember when they built the addition to Baird as well. So that was 41 years ago. So that's a long time.
That was the big building.
It was, but Dr. Adrian Dorn, who I love dearly, who was the president here, he was the only university president that could get any amount of money out of the state legislature that he wanted, because he was former Speaker of the House of Representatives in Kentucky. And he was able, if you look back at when each building was built, check and see who the governor and lieutenant governor was at the time. Their names went on the building. So he was a politician as well, you know, so, yep. So, all right, fire away. He probably is.
Yeah. John, what brought you to Morehead State?
What brought me to Morehead State University was actually, I came as a fluke. Greg Bullock, who was in my high school band at Male High School, Louisville Male High School, he was coming for his interview. He had to play for a full scholarship in music. So I came and accompanied him and his mother and father. I came and played the piano while he did his audition for his music scholarship here at Morehead State. I was en route to Penn State University. But then when I came and saw this campus, and it reminded me so much of growing up in the country in Newcastle, Kentucky, in Henry County, I went back home and told my mother and stepfather, said, this is where I'm going to school. And that was in March of '67. And I enrolled, and I hit this campus the week before Labor Day, 1967. So that's why I came to Morehead. It was a fluke, actually, yeah.
What was dorm life like?
Dorm life like? Well, as I have said earlier, there were no co-ed dorms. There were, and dorms were, shall we say, segregated by your class. Freshman dorms for men were Waterfield Hall, Mays, and part of Butler. Juniors, sophomores and juniors were relegated to Cooper and Wilson, and juniors and seniors were Regents and Alumni Tower. Cartmel Hall was not. But I will have to say that dorm life was not as bad as you might think. It was, you really became a close-knit family, because some of the young men that I met as freshmen in Waterfield Hall, we're still friends to this day, 41 years later. So it was rambunctious, of course, and we had to make our own fun because Morehead was dry, except for the bootleggers at each end of the town. We didn't have any of the restaurants, so we had to make our own fun, and we weren't supposed to have hot plates, but we did. But it was just share and share alike. When one of us were in trouble, all of us were in trouble. So it was fun, actually. Panty raids, yeah, had those too. So, and even the girls had panty raids on the boys' dorms, and we would throw underwear out the window. You know, they say turnabout's fair play. But it was fun, actually, yeah.
Do you have a bootlegger story?
Do I have a bootlegger story? It all depends on which one you're talking about. The clock on this end of town coming in, or the turnaround at the end of town. Let's see. Actually, it was easier to get it at the turnaround on going west on 60 than it was to get it at the clock on the east end of 60. And we really didn't go to the bootleggers that much, because the cops were always looking for underage drinkers. And back then, freshmen couldn't have cars on campus. Only sophomores, and sophomores' cars were locked up during the week. The parking lot where Cartmel Hall is now used to be where undergraduates parked their cars, and they were only unlocked on the weekends so they could go home. So usually most of us, and I started hanging around with juniors and seniors, we used to drive all the way to Mount Sterling. And there was a liquor store there called the Bank Street Liquors. And I was always bold anyway, because I come from Louisville, so I thought I was Mr. Big Shot. And I walked into Bank Street Liquors, and I gave them my gave them my order. And the man came out and I said, oh my Lord, I'm going to be carded. Well, the man said, what was your father's name? I said, I could have made up anything, but I said my father's name was Marion Oscar Roberts. And he said, was he in the service? I said, yeah, he was in the Armored Corps, Armored Division from Fort Knox. I said, but unfortunately he was killed in Korea. He said, would by any chance he have a nickname? And I said, yeah, his name was Smokey, because my father, being half white, he had smoky gray eyes, and they called him Smokey. And he said, I happen to serve in the same Armored Division with your father. I happen to know how old you are, but because of that, you're always welcome here at Bank Street Liquors. So when they found that out, I always made the runs to Mount Sterling. I always made the runs to Mount Sterling. But it was a fun time. It really was.
You majored in English and history?
Yes, it did.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, when I came to Morehead, I, like a lot of other students at 18 years old, thought I wanted to be one thing and wound up finding my true passion. I wanted to be a doctor, God, but what I know now. But then I had an English teacher, Miss Bray, and she opened up so many, she tapped into all of the love I had for literature in high school, but just opened up the avenues. And I always had a love of history, and she said, John, you should major in English and history, because you can't teach English without having a connection to history, because everything that is written is a reflection of what happens in time, and everything that is written is also a reflection of time, and history affects it all. And so that's how I decided to change my major my freshman year from pre-med to English and history. One of the things that they required at Morehead at the time for English majors was you had to minor in a foreign language, because we would learn the literature of the language that we took. I was a French minor, and I tried to get into French 1, but they happened to pull my transcript and saw that I had 3 years of high school French, so I had to take intermediate French and above. But, and I had the same French teacher for all 18 hours of my French minor, Dr. Vito DeCaria. And I remember very well, he says, now, this work here by so-and-so, Stendhal, affected so-and-so in English literature and British literature. So there was a correlation. And I didn't major in music because I've been playing since I was 7 years old, but I didn't want to dissect music to destroy the love of music. So I love history and English, so that's why I chose to be an English and history major.
Do you remember any of the history professors?
Here, I had one, Rob Tinsley. I had him for the second part of Western Civ 2. He was young, he was fresh out of graduate school. And he walked into my Western Civ 2 class, and I was cocky. I was a sophomore. I was cocky. And I happened to walk in late, and he says, Mr. Roberts, are you ready? I said, you see, I have my books on my chair and my pen in hand. Let us begin. He rode me like a thoroughbred all semester. When I did my final exam, we had to do them in the blue books. I don't know if they still use blue books or not for final exams. And I got a 99.9 on my final exam. I got an A out of the class, but I got a 99.9 on my final exam because he took off a half a point because I did not cross the T in my last name. But my favorite history professor was Dr. Wilhelm Exelbert. He taught European history and Russian history. And my interest was more in Slavic and world history than U.S. history because U.S. history was boring. Dr. Exelbert was from Austria, and at that time you could smoke in the classroom, so he smoked unfiltered Camels, and he had a photographic memory, and he would walk up and down class, and he taught history like the greatest panoramic movie you ever saw. He actually was at the University of Vienna when Lenin left to go start the Russian Revolution. So that was a connection that very few of us, you know, the Russian Revolution, okay, da-da-da, but he was actually a student at the University of Vienna at the time that Lenin went back to start the Russian Revolution. One One interesting story, I don't remember the student's name, but Philip Roth came out with Portnoy's Complaint, and he had read it, and he wanted to test Dr. Exelbert and his photographic memory. So he brought the book to class when we were taking an exam. And Dr. Exelbert said, well, I'll read it while you take the exam. And Dr. Exelbert could just flip through the pages, you know, because of his photographic memory. And he would take his finger. And so after the exam was over, we all waited until it was over. The student walked up and said, Dr. Exelbert, what do you think about what Philip Roth said, so and so and so and so? And he kind of turned back, the student turned back to class and winked to say, I got him now. He said, well, if you check on page so and so and so, paragraph so and so, so line so and so, you'll find what I'm talking about. He flipped in there, and that was exactly what he was talking about. So that kind of shot that right quick, you know. So it was just interesting. And out of Dr. Exelbert's class, I began to understand how everything in life is a cycle. Everything that happens in history is cyclical. And I've taken that philosophy and used it in the 38 years I've been teaching. As a result of Dr. Exelbert, I went on to become the work study for Dr. Louis Magda in the business and economics department here at the time. And he was a refugee from Budapest. And he had one of the largest brokerage houses in Budapest, but he had to leave because the communists took over Hungary. And he fled and was working in a furniture factory in Ashtabula, Ohio. And Dr. Dorn heard about it, and Dr. Dorn brought him down here. Well, Dr. Magda wrote all of his textbooks in French because French was the intellectual and diplomatic language. I was a French minor, so I would actually sit and transcribe his textbooks from French into English. So that's, so Dr. Exelbert and Rob Tinsley and Dr. Magda, and of course Miss Bray, Dr. Charles Pelfrey in the English department, they all gave me the basis for a solid educational foundation here at Morehead. And as a result, I tell my students, unless you have a solid foundation in your discipline, all of the accoutrements you might put on your life and all the knowledge you think you have is not going to stand the test of time. You can always tear down a house, but leave the basic foundational footprint and build a new house. But if that footprint of that foundation is not solid, it's not going to stand. So I tell anybody, the foundation of all my success started here in 1967.
What were race relations like on campus?
Actually, the race relations here in Morehead in 1967 were typical of the race relations in the country. Here we were a student body of almost 8,000 and less than 105 or 110 black students on campus. One thing I must applaud Dr. Dorn and his administration for is they didn't put all the black students in one dorm or on one floor, whatever. We were all mixed in. We still had a tendency at that time to flock together because you always like to stay with like-minded folks. A lot of our race relations was also racial awakening for all of us, because a lot of the African American students at that time came from your larger areas, Lexington, Louisville, Cincinnati, but you did have some from Winchester, Mount Sterling, and so forth. And you did have some come from Eastern Kentucky. You had some come from Wheelwright, Kentucky, for example, and where their race relations were in some ways better than ours. But it was a fact of the black students were going through an awareness time of their own. The Black Power movement was coming in and so forth and so on. And we needed something to, shall we say, gravitate to, because there were no black sororities or fraternities on campus when I came in '67. I think they got the first black sorority my senior year, and the first interest group for a black fraternity my senior year. So fortunately, I did not join a fraternity. I didn't have a desire to, actually, but there wasn't that opportunity for fraternity that the white students had. So the Black Gospel Ensemble was our only means of coalescing and coming together as an ethnic group. I'll never forget April 4th, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I was getting ready to leave Waterfield Hall, going to class, and there was a mass announcement. Dr. Dorn canceled classes that day, and he had an open forum in Button Auditorium to talk about what was happening and why it happened, and the necessity for us to remain calm. Morehead did break ground in a lot of ways. 1969, was it? Or 68? No, it was my freshman year, 1968. Morehead elected its first black homecoming queen. That was Lyda Lewis, who went on to become Kentucky's first black Miss Kentucky. And that was done because of the fact that she was judged on who she was, not for the color of her skin. And that's what Dr. Dorn always stressed with each of us. Dr. Dorn, if it hadn't been for Adrian Dorn, the Black Gospel Ensemble would have never gotten off the ground, to be perfectly honest. Because he says, and he was aware that there was no other way for black students to have a sense of a social sense, because Morehead did not have it. There was only one black family in town. There was no black churches for us to worship. So this was our way of worshiping and, shall we say, socializing with each other. And another thing, when the Kent State students were shot, Dr. Dorn led a candlelight vigil down University Boulevard from his home. And that diffused a lot of the tension, because the year the students were killed at Kent State was the first year ROTC was on this campus. So it was kind of like, so it was race relations, we were at the height of Vietnam, and ROTC on campus. But as a result, we really had no, shall we say, major race problems. I guess it was because we were so evenly dispersed among the student body in living quarters, and our classes, very rarely were our classes, and our majors didn't let us have classes together. So I would say our race relations were a microcosm of exactly what was going on in this country, trying to find out where we were going and what we needed to do to get where we needed to be.
Do you remember anything else about the Vietnam War? Was there an anti-war movement on
No.
campus at all?
There was a little bit of unrest when it was announced that ROTC was coming. But when Dr. Dorn and Sergeant Manuel Cabral, I'll never forget it, he was the first recruiter and ROTC instructor on campus. And he made sure that they had an unobtrusive office off of Button Auditorium. You know, they were not a very visible force on campus, but they were there. And I think that was due in part to the administration. And because we all knew that we were going to be treated fairly. Dr. Dorn always said, I don't care what you do. If you act up, there's a train going east, train going west, bus going east, bus going west. I'll give you an apple and a peanut butter sandwich and a ticket and be on it. And he meant that. So, you know, but we were fortunate, nestled here in our little corner of the world,